For those of you unfortunate enough to know who Jordan Peterson is, you know that he's considered by many, mostly his fans, to be one of the top public intellectuals of the modern age. When Peterson rose to fame, it was marked by two phases, in my opinion. The first was with the video that got him famous in the first place, where the courageous Canadian psychologist took on a bunch of radical trans college students in an attempt to oppose a Canadian bill that would allegedly suppress freedom of speech. This led to Peterson becoming notorious overnight as a supposed champion of free speech against an authoritarian group of radical trans activists. From here, Peterson would go on to participate in a series of interviews and debates with various people, such as other college professors and news reporters, which culminated in the second phase of Peterson's rise, when Peterson was interviewed by the BBC's Cathy Newman. The Newman interview would be Peterson's best performance thus far, thanks to Peterson's quick responses with a measured, friendly tone, invoking seemingly objective statistics and factoids, combined with Newman's confrontational attitude and incompetence. Peterson was seen as handily dominating the debate, not only defending himself effectively, but also subduing a supposed top agent of radical feminism elevated by a corrupt mainstream media outlet. If the first video was Peterson's elevation from mere mortal to sainthood among conservatives, then the Cathy Newman interview would be Peterson's ascension to godhood, and thus the legendary 1000 IQ slayer of chaos dragons and the radical left had now been fully manifested. But not really. As you might have been able to tell from my last video, I'm not someone who's impressed by Peterson's intellect. Oh sure, I can acknowledge that Peterson is well knowledgeable in certain areas, and has good debate skills. However, I've seen tons of interviews and debates involving Peterson, and I have to say I find his performance most of the time to be incredibly overrated. There are countless videos of Peterson's debates with absolutely obnoxious titles like "Two feminists tried to frame and cancel Jordan Peterson, instantly destroyed," and Jordan Peterson's obliterating trans activist compilation. But a lot of the time I see neither destruction nor obliteration. Oh, it's true, Peterson may do a pretty good job offering some kind of rebuttals and such, but the people he's debating at a given moment do a pretty good job of defending their positions and holding their own as well. In fact, in a lot of cases, a lot of these titles are really clickbaity, and when you watch the actual videos, the discussions are usually pretty measured and mild. Sure, you could probably say that Peterson comes out ahead in a lot of these, but I could argue that his opponents defend themselves quite competently, and in some cases, comfortably triumph over him. Hell, I would personally argue that the only real impressive performance Peterson has had thus far, where he does anything close to destroying his opponent, was with Cathy Newman. And that was almost entirely based not on Peterson's alleged vastly superior intellect, but Newman's ill-preparedness and incompetence. Conversely, there's quite a few examples where I feel Peterson is the one who gets destroyed handily. Some instances of the latter that immediately come to mind are Peterson's debates with people like Matt Dillahunty, Slavoj Žižek, and the topic of this specific video, Australian comedian Jim Jefferies. A few months after his victorious interview with Cathy Newman, Peterson made the mistake of going on Jim Jefferies' show. The subject of the episode that Peterson was on was mainly about free speech, but there was a small segment where Jefferies asked Peterson a question about civil rights. And it led to one of my favorite Jordan Peterson related exchanges of all time.
Making people bake a cake for a gay wedding.
Making them do it?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a very good idea.
But here's the argument. So should they be able to deny making a cake for a black couple if they don't like black people?
Allowed to? Probably. That doesn't mean it's right.
Okay, so then we had the civil rights movement where they said black people, you had to serve them in your restaurants and stuff like that. And it did work and it did make our society better. But would you argue that that still wasn't right?
No, that was right.
Why is that different to now if you didn't want to make a cake for black people?
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not different. Yeah. Maybe I was wrong about that.
You guys have absolutely no idea how much I adore that clip. I mean, here we have what the incredibly prestigious New York Times called the most influential public intellectual in the Western world. A man that countless conservative and anti-woke fans would consider one of the most brilliant minds to ever walk the earth, get completely and utterly flummoxed by a mere entertainer. Obviously, as a non-fan of Jordan Peterson, I quite enjoyed to see him get utterly embarrassed like this. However, as a non-fan, I found it equally fascinating how he was flummoxed by this. How did something as ridiculously basic as this trip up a supposed genius-level intellect? Clearly, I would not be alone in wondering such a thing. Peterson's fan base, witnessing the humiliation that had just occurred, immediately started offering plausible explanations/excuses for why the invincible intellectual would falter this badly. The first excuse that they came up with was by that point a rather cliche one, and that was that the vile jester that was Jim Jefferies heavily edited the interview to make the poor innocent doctor look like a buffoon. Let us read some examples. Only way you can win with Peterson is with edits. Jim lost me with the editing of his talk with Jordan Peterson. Thank you for keeping this heavily edited and deceptive video still up and with the comments open. It's sick how they edited together 100 clips from different contexts and didn't even manage to make Peterson look all that bad. And so on. Of course, for you see, the great Jordan Peterson cannot look bad. He can only be artificially made to look bad. Only through nefarious trickery and sinister chicanery can the top conservative intellectual in the Western Hemisphere be made to look bad. Gotta love that whole personal responsibility of virtue that the right-wingers love to uphold. Unfortunately for Peterson's lobster loyalists, there was no mischievous editing done. At least not for that particular exchange anyway. What, don't believe a soy boy like me? Then hear it straight from the lobster's mouth.
Why do you continue to agree to have these conversations that are going to be edited?
Oh, well, that's a good question.
The Jim Jefferies one was another one.
Yeah.
Jim's a friend of mine. But, I mean, he gave you a good question, and you actually gave a good answer. You said, actually, I'm probably wrong about that.
Yeah, yeah.
When you were talking about whether or not gay people whether someone should be forced to bake a cake for gay people.
Yeah.
And you said forced to, probably not. And they said, well, what if they don't want to bake a cake for black people?
Yeah.
And he said, well, actually, they probably should be forced to.
Yeah, well,
okay, I'm probably wrong.
Yeah, well, I was probably wrong in everything I did in that part of the discussion because I hadn't thought that issue through enough to actually give a good answer.
You didn't expect that issue because this is not something you talk about commonly.
No, and it's actually complicated, right? I mean,
Yes.
obviously, the whole "I won't serve you because you're black" thing is not good. But then again, you also have the right to choose who you're going to affiliate with. But then that's complicated because it's a commercial circumstance. And then if you're making a cake, is that the same as serving or is that compelled speech? It's like, oh my God, these are border cases that cause a lot of controversy. I don't mean serving black people, obviously, that's not a border case. But these cases that cause a lot of controversy is where two principles are at odds and it isn't exactly clear where to draw the line. And
Right.
I'm not happy with my answer to that, but I hadn't spent the week it would take to think through the issue and really have a comprehensive perspective
And you
on
didn't
it.
expect that to be a subject anyway.
No.
Even Peterson himself admits that his answer was pretty terrible. Despite being one of the most brilliant people on the planet, well-versed in pretty much every subject known to man, his one weakness was apparently Civics 101. And just in case anybody thinks I'm taking their lobster daddy out of context, I'll link the video with the timestamp in the description. But alas, while many of Peterson's disciples tried to go down this route, many others had come to accept what might actually be the tragic reality, that their lobster lord might have in fact been legitimately bested by the evil Aussie. But hey, all was not lost. When life hands you a lemon, make lemonade, right? So now a different division of Peterson's loyal lobster brigade came up with their second excuse. This faction decided to accept Peterson's defeat, but simultaneously praise him for showing great humility and acknowledging the harsh reality that he was indeed wrong about something. Maybe it's not. Maybe I was wrong about that. That moment is stunning. I actually think the cake thing is a bit different. But what is amazing is how he didn't hesitate to admit he might have been wrong. It's so clear that truth and not winning the argument is Peterson's goal. The moment JP admitted that his conclusion about not serving gay people was too fast, and that he was wrong about it because it was a spontaneous question answer that needed more thoughts, made me respect him even more. Maybe it's not different. Maybe I was wrong. This is probably the most respectable response anyone could give, and it says so much about the person. Jordan Peterson admitting maybe I was wrong about that, after Jim made a very valid point that Jordan could not just dismiss. I respect that a lot. You gotta take something from this. It shows Jordan is someone that truly wants to move forward in the name of fact and science, and is able to stick true to what he believes in. He is not just someone that wants to win the argument or puts his ego before his beliefs. And here's what the far-right outlet, The Federalist, had to say. Peterson is humble enough to listen and admit he might be wrong. In his interview with Jeffries, Peterson saw this logic clearly, I guess for the first time. Then he calmly admitted he might be wrong. So two amazing things happened in these 6 minutes. A leftist defended free speech, and a public intellectual admitted he might be wrong. That is pretty fantastic, and a tiny glimmer of hope in these days of outrage and stupidity.
All that said, I do like that Jordan Peterson admits that he could be wrong on this issue. I don't think I've ever seen anyone in an interview do that ever in the history of the world, ever. So respect to him for saying that.
Incredible, folks. Just absolutely incredible. The cope here is off the charts. Imagine being Western civilization's top mind, yet being treated like an absolute teenager who had just taken his first high school class on the civil rights movement. But the actual reason Peterson did what he did was a lot more mundane and obvious. The reason Peterson did what he did was because he knew he was stuck in between a rock and a hard place. Either he tries to go ahead and defend his stupid position that it's fine for businesses to turn away whoever they want, and thus wind up defending Jim Crow laws, or he acknowledges that Jeffrey had a point, even if it resulted in him being embarrassed. So he had a choice between looking like a dullard and looking like a racist, and he decided that the former would be a lot less of a PR nightmare. Just to reiterate, even the Peterson simp from The Federalist acknowledged that this might have been the first time Peter actually encountered that argument. It's so nice to see conservatives maintain absolutely rigorous standards for their top thinkers. I'm reminded of that joke about the only requirement for being a conservative intellectual is to not have a southern accent. But I mean, come on, guys. Even someone with Peterson's cosmic brain power can't answer literally every single question now, can he? What's next? Are you guys going to expect him to be able to name all 3 branches of the US government? But what makes this pathetic excuse even more laughable is the fact that none of these idiots actually believe what they're saying. Don't believe me? Look no further than the aforementioned Cathy Newman interview. There was a specific moment in there where Peterson asked Newman a question that Newman was unable to answer, to which he openly acknowledged that she couldn't answer, resulting in Peterson triumphantly responding with, "Gotcha."
Why should your right to freedom of speech trump a trans person's right not to be offended?
Because in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. I mean, look at the conversation we're having right now. You know, like you're certainly willing to risk offending me in the pursuit of truth. Why should you have the right to do that? It's been rather uncomfortable.
Well, I'm very glad I put you on the spot.
No, but you get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on.
So
and that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
You haven't sat there and I'm just trying to work that out. I mean,
Gotcha.
You have got me. I'm trying to work that through in my head. Yeah, it took a while.
It did.
Did any of the people in Peterson's cult commend Newman for admitting her mistake? Of course they didn't. They made a meme out of it. They mocked it relentlessly. I'm sure all you will find it incredibly shocking that many of the responses were nowhere near as gracious to Newman as they were to Peterson. He didn't just get her. He wiped the floor with her. Laughing, crying emoji, peace sign, GB. Gotcha, bitch. Dave Chappelle. I'm trying to work that out through my head. Translated. How can I spin this to you being a racist transphobe? She's so fixated on wanting to argue with him that even when he agrees with her, she is lost for words. The best 60 seconds of any interview ever. I love it. Totally irrefutable fact that she had no answer to 3 laughing, crying emojis. Absolutely and utterly shocking responses indeed. Who could have guessed Peterson fans were just hypocritical douchebags? Okay, to be fair, I did see a tiny handful of responses that did indeed give her credit for acknowledging being wrong. But still, no one should find it surprising that the comments mocking her were far, far more prominent. Furthermore, as shown in the earlier Joe Rogan clip, once Peterson found himself in a nice, comfortable, safe space, the man who was praised for demonstrating humility and reflectiveness revealed his true colors, as being bitter and resentful for being so utterly humiliated. Basically confirming what the rest of us normal people already knew, that he shut his yap immediately, not because he suddenly became more educated and enlightened, but because he knew he had no way to slither out of it. And finally, I think one big reason why a large chunk of Peterson's fanbase accepted this defeat was probably because they might have been genuinely embarrassed that their brilliant hero was unable to provide any obvious rebuttal to one of the most basic civil rights questions. A rebuttal that honestly, virtually all of them probably could have provided far more competently than Peterson. I mentioned earlier that Peterson had a choice between looking like a moron and looking like a racist. But if Peterson was smarter, he might have been able to thread the needle a bit better, defending his stance that Christian couples can turn away gay people while also somehow still being in line with the Civil Rights Act. But Peterson couldn't do that because, as the Nimrod from the Federalist noted, this was probably the first time in his life that Peterson actually encountered that particular argument. Conversely, many of Peterson's fans and allies have encountered that argument and have come up with ways to justify their positions.
Okay, I don't think Jordan Peterson knew exactly what to say here, but I do. We live in 2018. We do not live in the 1960s. Discrimination against anyone isn't rampant except for maybe straight white Christian men. In general, in 2018, homosexuality is considered positive on balance. So there is a significant difference between the overt discrimination in the Deep South in the 60s and any kind of imagined discrimination in 2018 against homosexuals. Furthermore, race is an immutable characteristic. Sexuality is not an immutable characteristic. Maybe with some people, but certainly not with everyone. You have conflicting liberties with the debate about homosexuality. You have no conflicting liberties with regard to racism. People must have the right to consider human activities either right or wrong. We can't just accept somebody as being a particular way because they claim that's who they are inside. Do we permit bestiality? Do we permit pedophilia? Do we permit rape? Do we permit murder? Are these immutable characteristics? Are people born this way? Should we respect who they are? Should we not permit people to consider these things to be moral corruptions? Should we force society to facilitate the desires of these people? No, of course not. No one thinks being black is a moral decision, but people do think that being homosexual is a moral decision. And you may disagree with that, but people must have the right to decide what they believe about that. It is just as important to facilitate conservative Christians as it is to facilitate gays and lesbians.
I'm not saying these are good rebuttals, by the way, but it would at least give the impression that Peterson seems to have some understanding of what he's actually talking about, and would definitely have come off a lot better than Peterson completely rolling over. Peterson's stands can say whatever they need to try to make themselves sleep better at night, but even they knew deep down that there was no defense for this. The fact that these guys would offer him tips on how he should have rebutted Jeffries itself kind of proves the point after all. Imagine you're a huge fan of Mike Tyson, but you see him get knocked out at an exhibition match with someone like Carrot Top, and offering him pointers on how to properly throw a left hook afterwards. Obviously that would seem laughable, right? People look up to Mike Tyson because he's supposed to be a great boxer, not someone who needs advice on how to be a great boxer by his fan base. And similarly, these people look up to Peterson because they thought of him as a top-tier intellectual who would be giving them advice on how to annihilate woke feminists and trans activists and such. So, in conclusion, Jordan Peterson is kind of an idiot. Hey everybody, thanks for watching the video, and I do apologize for taking so long to come out with it. I realize I've taken quite a hiatus. It's been a hectic 2 years, made all the more hectic by the fact that, like a lot of people, I've unfortunately become recently unemployed as well. However, while the situation is unfortunate, it also breeds opportunity, because that means I actually have more free time which I can hopefully dedicate to making more videos. If you like my videos and want to help me out, I would really appreciate any and all support through my Patreon, which I'll link below. So thanks again, and I'm going to really make an effort to try to come out with my next video very shortly, so fingers crossed.